Thanks for tuning in to watch The Ordinary Filmmaker. It's Saturday, October the 30th, 2021. For the past 6 months or so, well, is it 6 months? Well, going back to March when I purchased an M1 MacBook Air, this one right here, and this is bare bones. It's got a 7-core GPU and it's got only 8 gigabytes of RAM. But I've been using it to edit every single video since then. That's right. So what kind of video am I working with? Well, I'm recording with the Canon R5, and every single video I record is 8K oversampled, or that 4K HQ or 4K fine mode. Now in the studio, I'm not recording Canon Log 3, but when I'm recording my personal stuff or family stuff, it's always Canon Log 3. And I've currently got a film that's 1 hour and 38 minutes long in Canon Log 3, and this thing can edit it without a problem, without skipping frames. When I bring up Activity Monitor, I can see that I'm only using anywhere between 6 and 7 gigabytes, and the swap is, well, less than a gig. And it doesn't seem to matter what I do. I don't seem to really throttle this thing too much. So as a video editing machine, it's quite powerful. It's even more powerful than my iMac Pro. That's right, that iMac Pro that came out in 2017, that big powerful thing that cost 4 times the price of this MacBook Air. So there shouldn't be any surprise at this point that the M1 or the M architecture processors developed by Apple are just absolutely fast. But what I want to talk about today is the difference between the M1 found in the MacBook Air, the Mac Mini, and the 13-inch Mac Pro, and the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. I haven't gone out and purchased mine yet because I'm really unsure of the M1 Max. Is the performance received from that computer fast enough to justify getting it over the M1 Pro? And really, how much more faster is it than the M1? Apple says that the M1 Pro is 70% faster than the M1, and the M1 Max is twice as fast as the M1 Pro. But those are Apple's figures. I want to know in my real world what level of performance I'm going to see. So what I did is I went to the Apple store yesterday because, well, I just can't simply buy an M1 Max at this point. I can't even buy an M1 Pro. They're sold out. So I went to the store and I brought my trusty SSD. This thing is 4 terabytes. It has some big projects on it, and I thought, let's go test it out. So I connected it up to a 32 gigabyte M1 Pro, 16-inch MacBook Pro. And you know what? It couldn't read it. It said, I'm sorry, but the files that you have on this SSD are newer than what I can handle. So I looked at about. Final Cut Pro was running on 10.5, 10.5.6 to be precise. So despite being a brand new laptop, it had an older version of Final Cut, even though it was running on Monterey. I was prepared. All I did was I went into the contents of the library. I navigated to the file folder that said original files, and I grabbed enough of those to basically put together a 30-minute video. Now, unfortunately, in this video, I didn't have any effects added because, well, it wasn't my time. I was already there for about half an hour taking up one of their laptops. So I just laid out 30 minutes of 4K HQ, Canon Log 3, and I even had some DJI footage in there too. So 30 minutes, and then I went to export. Now I want to let you know a couple of things first. This is already pre-rendered stuff because I'm pulling it out of a library, so there was no rendering that I needed to do. And I exported in H.265. I always use H.265, especially for YouTube. The files are a lot smaller, and for my hour and 38-minute video, I'm looking at 11 gigabytes, and if it was H.264, it'd be over 22. So I prefer H.265, and since the 2016 Mac, the iMac Pro, the M1, H.265 encoding is always faster than H.264 by an ever slight margin. Now, if you've got a 2015 MacBook Pro, well, that 1 hour and 38 would probably take you about 30 hours to render out. So anyhow, let's get to the result. It took longer than I thought. It took 19 minutes and 15 seconds to render out 30 minutes of Canon R5 4K HQ video. Well, I wasn't sure if this was great or not because, well, I had to create a new file in the Apple Store. So the next thing, well, obviously go home and try out on my MacBook Air. This is an M1 MacBook Air. Again, it's 8 gigabytes of RAM, and it's got a 7-core GPU. It's the bottom level spec. This was designed to be a family computer replacement, not for editing YouTube videos. But it's been doing very well. Again, since March, I've been using this to edit my YouTube videos. They're all shot in 4K. And the performance, when it comes to exporting, it's faster than an iMac Pro. It just blows away what my 2015 MacBook Pro was able to do. So what could it do? The same footage. I went through, I made sure nothing was rendered. I deleted all rendered files, used or not. I made sure, and you know what? Let me bring up the file here. I'm going to open up Compressor because I know it's 17 minutes. I just can't remember how many seconds it is, and this makes a difference because we're already less than what the M1 MacBook Pro, the 16-inch model in the Apple Store did. 17 minutes and 32 seconds. That's almost 2 minutes faster. That's significant. You might be wondering, that can't be right, Simon. That doesn't make any sense. How can your M1, entry-level M1 MacBook Air be faster than a computer that costs twice its price with a brand new processor, bigger, and based on everything Apple says and others are saying on YouTube, how can it be faster? Yeah, I thought the same thing, but unfortunately I only had that one data point, and in science, if you get a data point and it proves to disrupt your theory, your hypotheses, you don't throw out the data. It's still a valid data point. It's just, why is that happening? So I reached out to my friend at Apple. I said, I'm having this issue. He suggested I look at a few videos, and I did. And I'll tell you, he wasn't even sure, but he didn't have his own Mac at this point to be able to test out what I was saying. So I started watching a couple of videos. I watched one by Luke, and you know what? Luke seemed to come across the same thing as me. I want to share with you a slide from his presentation. In this file here, we can see the export time for both the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, and you can see there's almost no difference between the two. And how can this be when the M1 Max has twice the bandwidth, a lot more cores, and up to 64 gigabytes of video RAM? It's unified RAM, but video can access all of that. A little strange, right? And what about render? Well, take a look at this slide. Again, this is from Luke's video, and he goes into a lot of detail explaining that, you know, he doesn't understand why the M1 Max, which is a much faster chip, isn't offering any huge performance gains, in some cases being a second longer. When it comes to video, whether it's rendering or exporting, he just didn't see much of a difference. And it puzzled him, and it puzzled me as well. Now Luke, he puts together some really good videos. He's very dedicated. He puts a lot of effort into his channel. So it left me wondering, why are some of us noticing that on these newer machines, we're just not getting the performance? Now, on my machine, I'm pretty happy with the performance, but, you know, this is what, a $999 MacBook Air? You compare that to the one in the Apple Store, you would figure that the Apple Store one should be functioning perfectly fine. Any sort of handicaps or restraints have been lifted, and they're free to run free. Well, I watched another video, and this one was by the Tech, is it the Tech Group? Let me see. Yeah, the Tech Chap. And Tom, I liked his videos. He did a very similar test to what Luke Miani did, but he got some different results. Take a look at this slide. So to render out 10 minutes of 4K H.264 on a MacBook Pro 13-inch, it took 20 minutes and 36 seconds. On the M1 Pro, on a 16-inch MacBook Pro, that drops down to 11 minutes and 58 seconds. And look at this. The M1 Max, MacBook Pro 16, just under 7 minutes. And you can see there's a huge enough difference between these two. If this was a 10-minute video, that difference starts to mount up. And if you're doing multiple exports, multiple videos a day, that's a really big deal. Well, now let's take a look at Final Cut, because he did a test of Final Cut as well. In Final Cut, the times were quite a bit different. The M1 MacBook Pro 13 was able to do 10 minutes of 4K H.264 in 12 minutes and 36 seconds. The M1 Pro, 11 minutes and 38 seconds, so not a huge difference. But again, take a look at the M1 Max, 6.5 minutes. That's considerably faster than the M1 Pro. So how is it that Tom is able to get much improved times over the M1 Max, whereas Luke didn't see much of a difference. They're both using the same computers, aren't they? Yes, they are. And so I started to think, well, wait a minute. In the Apple Store, I didn't get that great of a performance over the M1 Pro. I started to think, well, wait a minute here. Could it be software versions? Now, in the store, they were using Monterey, and here at home, I'm using Big Sur. But my Final Cut Pro is at 10.6. It's the latest version. And I do remember when applying 10.6, I saw in the release notes, which I always read, that it's optimized for, guess what? Yeah, the new chips, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. And when I was watching Tom's video, one thing he did say when he was discussing Premiere Pro is he said, you know what, my times weren't that much better until I did an upgrade. And once I applied that update, the times on the M1 Max were much faster. So I think what we're seeing here is a difference in the version of Final Cut. If you're not running in the latest, as I saw in the store, my times with the M1 Pro were actually less than a computer that costs at least half its price. You know, $999 M1. Yeah, just the M1. Whereas the M1 Pro in the store was significantly slower. So I think that's what it has to do with it. Now, I did reach out to Luke and I reached out to Tom to try to find more information, but I think this is why we're seeing a lot of the differences. Like I said, I've been editing on this MacBook Air for, 6+ months, and I'm just staggered by the speed. But if I can improve my export times with all the effects that I'm using from MotionVFX, essentially how it works is on a 10-minute video, it usually takes about 8 minutes to export. If I do have a lot of MotionVFX effects, then that can actually go to 12 minutes. But rule of thumb is for every 1 minute of video, I can export in about 80% of that time. So it's quite a bit quicker. So I was really surprised to see the M1 Pro not do nearly as well. But like I said, I believe this has to do with the versions. And I reached out to Luke. I'm curious to know what version of Final Cut he was running on and Premiere. Did he have the latest? Because these updates just came recently, and that could be the difference. But there's something else I want to talk to you about too. My friend at Apple said I should take a look at iJustine. And I looked at her video, and she had another chap on there. They were talking about 8K video shot out of the Canon R5. And this is something I know quite a bit about because, well, I've been shooting with the R5 for many months. And I've shot in all different video modes. I've even shot in 8K, and I was actually, for about 3 or 4 months, producing videos on my son's channel, Planet Liam, and please like and subscribe. It would make him feel really, really happy. He hasn't produced a video in a while, and whenever he gets a bump in subscribers, it encourages him to produce more. And with Halloween tomorrow, who knows, we might have a little bit of a surprise. But anyhow, back to his channel. His videos were only about 2 to 5 minutes in length, so I thought, well, let's just practice with 8K video. Had no problem shooting 8K video for what I needed. I shot in Canon Log 3, and that produced some rather large files. Brought it in on my MacBook Air, and I was completely staggered. I did convert to Apple ProRes 422. I almost always do. And editing, I didn't drop a single frame. Kind of like what Justine noticed with her friend. They would apply effects, and it kept on going. And same thing with me. Unless I applied a MotionVFX effect, I didn't drop any frames at all, and it was just amazing. Now, I didn't go to her nth degree and put in like 12 different effects just to make things break. I was doing in real world. I'd adjust the colors, the midtones, the highlights, the color curves, not the color curves, the curves, anything just to produce the video that I was happy with the end result. So yeah, 8K video, this thing can edit really, really well. However, when I went to export, it was like I jumped in a pool of molasses. Things slowed to a grinding halt. That 2.5 minute took 90 minutes to export. One of those 5-minute videos took about 3 hours. Just staggeringly slow. And I was impressed with what Justine showed in terms of editing, but as the M1 MacBook Air can pretty much do that, it's not that impressive to me. What would impress me much is seeing the export and render times, because the M1 Pro actually has, we'll use a term core, it has a core dedicated to transcoding or optimizing 8K ProRes video. This is basically taking that accelerator card from the Mac Pro. What's it called? I forgot. It's around $2,100. It's designed to just accelerate Apple ProRes video. Anyhow, so they've got a core in there that does that on the M1 Pro. So it should be significantly faster. Just like when they added hardware acceleration or hardware encoding for the MacBook Pro 2016, I could now export in H.265 in about 50 minutes for a 1-minute video, or a 50-minute video, whereas in the 2015 MacBook Pro, it would take 22 hours. The M1 Max actually has double the amount of cores related to H.265 or 8K encoding in ProRes, and I would have loved to have seen those figures. Knowing that you could edit really fast is one thing, but when it comes to exporting and rendering 8K video, that was the one thing I was missing. It's one thing I was looking forward to seeing, and I could see from the looks on her face, she was just staggered at the performance of the M1 MacBook Pro. And she had DaVinci Resolve running, Safari running while doing all these effects. And I get that. Sometimes when I'm doing videos, I get so excited I miss a key point. And that's what I want to see is how is 8K rendering out of the R5. And when I shot my son's stuff, I didn't shoot RAW. I shot all I. I didn't see the need to shoot RAW and put the computer through its test because I was just getting used to using it. And I did about 3 or 4 videos that way, but it got to the point where waiting for a couple of hours to export, it was just too long. I just didn't want to tie up the computer. I didn't want to wait that long to do a project. So I kind of put 8K on hold, but I plan to go back to 8K once I have an M1 or an M1 Max. So what do you think? What do you think about these different videos? I've seen so many videos in the last week. A lot of them actually just look at the Apple keynote video and tell us what they told us in the keynote. And I started producing a video like that. And then I realized, you know what? I'm not providing any value. I'm providing a synopsis. And if you just watch the segments after the earbuds and that other stuff at the beginning, Apple does a very good job of selling you on the key benefits of the two processors. What I want to see is the real world results. And unfortunately, because I haven't been able to get my hands on one, and because the Apple Store is using outdated software, I'm unable to get the right test to deliver you the results. So like you, I'm still watching other YouTube videos that are using 8K footage out of the R5, that are testing rendering and export times on the latest software. So if you do watch a video and you find that the M1 Max isn't any faster than the M1 Pro, ask them what software versions they're using. Ask them what operating system they're on. And for the ones where it is faster, same thing. You want to find out what versions they're on, because I think right now the reason for the differences in performance numbers and benchmarks from the two is simply because of the software versions. But yeah, and I don't really care for the benchmarks. I don't really care about Cinebench, all that sort of stuff, because it doesn't tell me how my life is going to improve. I want to see real life numbers in real life usage of 4K video, H.265, H.264, 8K all-I, 8K RAW, that kind of thing, because that will justify whether I want to spend an extra $1,200 US or $2,000 Canadian on a computer. Because if I can significantly cut down the time, let's say instead of an hour to maybe 45 minutes or half an hour, that is worth it for me to spend that extra. But for the ordinary filmmaker, if you're just doing a couple of 4K videos, you're just doing it for family, you only do a couple of videos a year, you know what? Something like an M1 MacBook Air is more than fast enough. And I'd probably go with 16 gigs, although I'm using 8 gigs, and it's more than enough. The one thing I did upgrade on this that I see as very, very important is the SSD, bringing it up to 512 gigs. It's a family computer, and over time, we're going to use up that storage, even with iCloud. For any large video editing, I attach an SSD to this thing. All my videos coming out of the studio here use a Ninja 5, so I basically take the Angelbird 1 terabyte mini SSD, the Atom X, plug it directly in and edit right off of that. I do not copy anything onto the SSD, because if I ever have a problem with a computer, it gets stolen, or I lose the SSD, or it has to go in for a repair, I lose my content. By recording externally, something happens to the computer, no problem, close it down, send it into Apple, use one of my other Macs, even if it's one of my older 2009 and I'll switch over to H.264 and I can edit out no problem. And I've actually done that. So my advice is, if you're just, you know, a regular ordinary person, family person, you know, one of these lower end Macs can easily slice and dice 4K video like it's butter. But if you're doing a YouTube channel, if you're looking at doing this professionally and, you know, time matters, then you know what, definitely look at getting the M1 Max, because you're going to get, you know, for $2,000, how much revenue do you make in a given year? Look at your revenue in a given year and look at that extra $2,000 or $1,200 US. And I think you're going to find out the justification in just your render and export times is going to be significant. It's going to be huge enough that it'll take weeks, maybe even just days, to generate a positive return on investment. And one other thing too, please like and subscribe. Your likes and subscribes are like a pat on the back. When I look at the video performance in the morning, I go like, wow, this is really exciting. I need to get out there and produce a new video. And this morning when I woke up, I wasn't planning on doing this. I thought, you know what, I'm not going to do a video today. I just want to relax. But then I thought, you know, this has been kind of bugging me for a little bit. I want to get this out there and kind of a treat to you guys on the weekend. But in a little bit of behind the scenes, I did have a major problem this morning. I don't know what it is with the Tascam. It was just, the static was bad. And I thought, okay, I had something like this before. I undid where the mic screws in to the base unit. I tried that, it didn't work. So I got a screwdriver, I unscrewed things, and this is why I like it when companies don't solder everything in. I pulled everything out. I didn't see anything that looked anything strange at all. Everything seemed fine. So I put everything back together, put everything in, screwed it back up, and you're hearing the audio and it's perfectly fine. So all I can think of is something came loose a little bit. By screwing it back up and putting it back in, it was fine. And I had multiple different microphones because I have multiple Tascams. And I tried different mics, same problem. The base unit was causing the problem. So this is the newer one that I purchased. I don't know, but I hate it when I lose a video. And I wasn't going to do another one, but then I got so angry at the issue. I said, damn it, I'm going to go out and put a video out. I want to put a video out because there's others of you like me out there that are kind of confused by the contradictions in the videos that we're seeing. And it's not because people don't know what they're doing when they're testing. It's not because they're using different machines. It's most likely, as I believe, this is my hypothesis, that it's different versions of Final Cut or Premiere. And each company has released just recently updates to the software to take advantage of those new processors. So that's what I'm thinking of. I don't think it's OS. I really do think it's the software versions. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great weekend, and Halloween's on a Sunday this year. So have a good Halloween. We'll talk later. Thanks for tuning in.